I was commissioned by the European Union in Thailand. They've got kind of association with all the cultural institutions based in Bangkok and in Thailand. So they came out a few years ago with a project to highlight the connectivity between Europe and Thailand in terms of culture. And they looked after architecture, and they suddenly found that, yes, there were some shared heritage between Europe and Thailand. So they decided to create a map of Bangkok the first year, and then it has been extended to the all of Thailand, but that was digitally made. And I was in, well, I've been commissioned to do the research and to look and try to identify the building. So I was also asked by many universities to come and talk to students to make some presentations. The presentation you will see now has been, well, I revamped it for today, but it's basically what I also show it to students to explain or to highlight why this architecture is so important for Thailand. Well, and then it's an overall presentation, and I'm sorry, but I will probably go over some of the topics which will be highlighted later, because of course I will talk about the Portuguese, the Italians, but I will also speak about the French, because the French had also kind of influence on this heritage. All right, let's go. Next, okay. So yes, the first contacts between Siam and Europe start, of course, with Portugal. Portugal is the first country to send envoys to Ayutthaya, the previous capital. So that's around 1511. And there is the first trade treaty signed with Portugal. So that's the first country. And of course, the fact that Portuguese were there awakened the interest of other countries. So the Dutch followed very quick. And you know, there is a big connection and even wars between Portugal and Dutch to conquest parts of Asia. And then French arrived. They were, well, they said, well, English came, but they withdrew very quickly. And then the French were also quite influential. So we can say that Portugal, Dutch, Holland, and then France were the three most important countries from the 17th century. Next one. So yes, so the French missionaries arrived in 1662, and that's the first big official embassy between Siam and France. France did not play a very big role in terms of development in Thailand, except for two things. First of all, they had building fortresses on the Vauban style. So you've got along the Chao Phraya River in Bangkok, 2 or 3 forts, which follow the pattern of Vauban fortress in Europe. And also, well, they've been there also for education, of course. So interesting to see how Siam developed at that time. Of course, well, there is a lot of controversies about why Siam was not a colony in Southeast Asia. But as you can see on that map, so you've got the different countries and what they did conquest. So in green, you've got the Portuguese, and you see these are the oldest, this is the oldest colonial power coming from Europe into Southeast Asia. Then the Dutch followed, of course, this is Indonesia. And then, well, you start to see the British, the big push comes at the end of the 18th century and all along the 19th century. And then the French followed and come around the Mekong Basin from the middle of the 19th century. And the buffer state between the British and the French empires is Siam. So Siam negotiated quite well, and we will see why suddenly Siam decided to embrace this European presence. Next. So yes, the way that Siam could protect itself against being integrated into European empires was by negotiating. And they are very good for negotiation. They were very good to deal with the different powers. And they decided to sign trade treaties with almost all possible countries around. So it started in the 17th century with the Dutch, and prior to that with the Portuguese. But from 1850, Siam signed almost every year a new treaty with a country. So you've got the Bowring Treaty with Britain, which is certainly the most important because it gave a lot of concession, territories, diplomatic roles to the British. But then you had the USA, quite interestingly, France, Denmark, Prussia, Belgium, Italy, Sweden. So in 15 years, Siam had treaties, trade treaties with most of the important European powers. Next. However, it was not enough. And Siam had also the idea to show that it was equal to colonial powers. So the best way to be equal was to show that they were also embracing this European modernity, you know, to be modern. We forgot about it a bit, but 150 years ago, to be modern was to be European looking and westernized. So that's probably what could have been the biggest public relations campaign that a country could have done 150 years ago. And Siam decided to look like a European, well, some of the countries belonging to European empires. That was the way to modernize Bangkok and turn it into a European town. Next. So it was also fostered by trips from King Chulalongkorn, Rama V, which first visited countries which were part of colonial empires. So he went to Jakarta, to Batavia, to visit the city. He went to Singapore. So he had an idea how these cities in Southeast Asia looked as European, as part of colonial empires. Then he decided to visit Europe. That was in 1897. And he came for a second trip in 1907, which was this time a private trip. Next. So you can see the itinerary of King Rama V. He arrived in Venice and he left Europe from Naples, Pompeii. And well, and you can see that he visited 10 countries basically during a time of 5 to 6 months, including France, which was considered an enemy at that time. So, and to show that Bangkok was a modern city, of course, the monarchy decided to invite engineers, architects, artists into Thailand. So it's a very unique case for Siam. Siam is the only country which decided to have European working for them. It was not the colonial power imposing its image on locals, but it was the royal house which decided to do it, always for this purpose of public relations and showing that Bangkok was a global modern city. Next. So you had some 400 to 500 European, which arrived to Bangkok around 1885, 15 European embassies and legations, and you had 40 people working permanently for the court, for the royal court. So these are some of the names of people. One district became the center, and that was Bangrak district, which is along the Chao Phraya River. This is where also the first concrete road was built, which is okay, it will come back. Sorry, I forgot the name of it, but it's on the next slide. I think it's Chao Prung, I believe, road. So yes, so Bangkok became, of course, a center for commerce and also for trade and also for culture. You've got hotels coming in. You have a lot of institutions which turned Bangkok into a global city on par almost with Singapore at that time. Bangkok in the early 20th century is the second largest city with a foreign population and foreign institutions. Next. So you can see on that picture along the Chao Phraya River, just in the middle, that's the European settlement, which stretches. Of course, it was along the river because the river was basically a trade road. All the goods were accommodated up to the sea, taking the Chao Phraya River. Kind of motorway, actually. Next one. So what you see at the same time, it's a typical European life in Bangkok. You've got, for example, on the left side, the famous Oriental Hotel. This small building is still there. Well, totally hidden in a number of concrete, not so nice buildings, but it's still there. The building next, this white building used to be the first department store run by the German. It's today a not very successful shopping mall. And you see, yes, the famous roads done in a very European way with electricity, tramways, concrete roads, something which is very European. One. And what is interesting also is a country, Siam, tried to mix up, to blend together European and Thai architecture. The most obvious example is the Chakri throne hall at the Royal Palace in Bangkok. But when you go around Bangkok, you will see that lots of buildings, for example, the first picture that you saw at the beginning of my presentation is a temple. This is the marble temple. The marble temple was built by an Italian architect, well, following some advices from a royal prince, but it was built in the shape of a church. So this is the kind of very special, unique architecture that you will see in Bangkok, which make this shared heritage unique in the world. Next. So the end of this European influence comes with the 1930s and the emergence of Pibun Songkram, who was a big admirer of Mussolini and of fascist regime in Europe. So he implemented a Thai cultural revolution. From that time, the European influence vanished very much. Also, architecture of that time very much reflect Art Deco, but it was not because it looked European specifically, but it looked modern, and it was a turning point compared to what has been built before. It was to emphasize the fact that this new regime coming under Pibun Songkram was something fairly different of what happened before. And in the map I did for the European Union, I tried to identify which cities were influenced by this kind of European architecture. I identify something like 50 to 60 cities. So these are the most important. A lot of cities east, close to Laos, were actually competing with the Indo-Chinese, French Indo-Chinese architecture. In the north, there was a big influence from the British, especially coming from Burma, due to the teakwood industry. And the south was more influenced, again, by the British, but very much by the Peranakan heritage, which is this mix between Malay, Chinese, and British architecture, especially Phuket. Next. So that's it. It's a quick presentation. I hope that you got more ideas about this presence of European there.